Hi everyone, Symmetry here, and welcome to my Blender beginner tutorial where we're going to whip up some cake. In the first 10 minutes or so, I go over the basics, how to navigate and use some of the tools. We're going to go over modeling, sculpting, and a little bit of texturing. If you're following along with this tutorial, please let me know in the comments and share your renders on social media and tag me. Unless you're making chocolate, because I don't like chocolate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, that way you get future tutorials. Why did I make a regular piece of cake? I don't even like cake. I like cheesecake. Anyway, let's get into this. Welcome to Blender. This might be your first time opening the program, might be your second time. You might have played around in the program a little bit, made a donut or two. Well, now that we got the program open, this is the screen that you'll be presented with when you open up Blender. And when you're opening up Blender for the first time, this screen will look a little different. It'll ask you about some options and settings to set. Go ahead and set it to how you feel comfortable, but I'm going to go over my preferences and how I have my Blender set up so that way you can follow along a little easier. So when we open up Blender, all you need to do is click off the screen here. And I'm going to be having screencasting here in the bottom left corner. That way everyone can keep track and know what I'm pressing and know the tools that I'm using. So first I'm going to go over some of my preferences here, and one of the main ones that I want to show you and you'll thank me later for is to increase your undo steps to 256. That way if you mess up or want a separate copy of a file that you're working on, and before you get into sculpting, you want to be able to go back and edit the model. This helps a lot. This has come in handy for me for so many different reasons. And then the other one I want to make sure you guys have set to, because this is how mine is the spacebar action set to search. Default will be set to play, but I have it set to search. That has just been a preference of mine, and it's been a lot easier to add in more meshes or look up something within Blender. So now that we have our preferences set, what I want to go over is over here on the left hand side you have your toolbar here, and to toggle that is simply just pressing T. And then over here on the right side is your navigation tools, is what I would call it, for your scene. And then if you press N, that pulls up your add-ons and object information. And to toggle that, all you need to do is press N. One thing that might look a little different from my Blender and yours is this add-on right up here, which is Blender Kit. For this project, we're not going to be using it. I'm just going to show you how to make textures from scratch. Each time you open a Blender, you're going to be started out with a default cube, camera, and light. And like a lot of 3D artists and Blender artists, we're going to hit A to select all and then delete. And then immediately what we're going to do is hit Shift A, add a mesh, and add another cube. So before we get into the project of making the cake, I want to go over some of the tools and how to use them. So currently what we're in is object mode. As you can see up here, we're in object mode, and you can toggle this by using this drop down menu or hitting tab, and it pulls up the wheel menu. And in object mode, I like to think of it more as like a general editing mode or a general scene mode, to where you can add in objects, you can move them around, rotate them, scale them up. You can still do a lot in object mode, but you can't edit the individual meshes. So the way we navigate in Blender is by using the middle mouse button and clicking down to be able to rotate around in the scene, or you can hold Shift and the middle mouse button, and that moves your view through the scene. Act as if when you're in Blender, your view of Blender is like a camera floating in this infinite world of 3D that is just waiting for you to create something magnificent. To select, we use the left mouse button, and you can drag a box out and box select, or you can click individual objects. And then this is our select box, cursor, move, rotate, scale, transform, annotate, measure, and add cube. Really, in object mode, I just normally stay within the select tool. Now let's get into shortcuts and some basic operating tools. And I want to apologize ahead of time if you struggle with learning shortcuts or don't like using shortcuts. I'm sorry, because 3D design, it requires shortcuts. So learn them fast and learn them now. So for our first one, what we can do in object mode is be able to move our objects. What we want to do is have the object selected and grab it using G. What else we can do is rotate by using R. And S for scale. What you can do with all those transformations as well is lock it to an axis. So when we grab something and want to move it, we can move it only on the x-axis if we want. So what you do is grab it with G and then hit X. So now it's locked only on the x-axis. And then same with Y, G and then Y. And same with Z. And it also applies to scale and rotate. Let's go over some of the edit mode basics. So to get into edit mode, again, let's press tab and hit edit. So now in edit mode, we can add detail and transform and manipulate the mesh itself with using vertices, edges, and faces. And as you see now too, we have a whole new tool set over here in edit mode. In edit mode, we still have our select, cursor, move, rotate, scale, and transform, annotate, but now we have measure, add cube, extrude, insert face, bevel, loop cut, knife tool, and poly build. Everything else has its own uses, but for this project, we're going to be sticking with only a few of them. So within edit mode right now, if you look up here in the left-hand corner, I am currently in vertex select, and then there's edge select and face select. And the shortcuts for these to switch in and out of. So for vertices, what you want to press is 1, but not on the numpad, 2 for edges, and 3 for faces. And in each one, you can select one vertice and move it. And just like in object mode, we want to use G to grab, R is to rotate, and S is to scale still. Can't really see it with the vertices. Let's try with a face. R to rotate, S to scale. And then some of the other tools and things that we might be doing in this project is for extruding, what you want to do is grab a face and hit E, and that creates a new geometry for your object. Another one is adding in loop cuts. With your object selected and in edit mode, all you need to hit is Control R or Command R and hover over an edge or a face. Hit the left mouse button once, and now you can drag where you place your loop cut. Or if you click the right mouse button, it'll place it in the middle for you. So to go over what we're looking at in some of the screens in Blender right here, over here on the right hand side is your scene collection, and this is where all your objects will be. So when you add in new cubes or new planes, this is where they'll show up, and you can select them that way as well. And right below it is a plethora of menus, which I kind of just like to call object menus. So with an object selected, you can get info about it. You can look at specific tools. This is where your render settings are as well, and your output settings, scene settings, world settings, so for world lighting and whatnot. This is where you have your object info. This is where we will apply modifiers. Particle systems, we might get into that when we get into the sprinkles. Physics, constraints, which I've only used constraints when it comes to rigging a character. Data, so vertex groups and shape keys. Material, we'll get into this once we get into the texture portion of this project. And then textures. And we'll also be using this when we get into the sculpting aspect of this cake slice. Now that we went over some of the basics of Blender and how to navigate the program and the tools, let's get into this project and get a slice of cake. So first things first, what we're going to do, like many other tutorials and many other 3D artists before me, is we push A to select all and delete. And then immediately Shift A, add mesh, and add a cube. Get used to this process because we do it a lot. So when we're in Blender with our first cube, so what we want to do is get the basic shape of the cake. So first thing we want to do is jump into edit mode by pressing tab and clicking edit mode. Use the numpad 7 to get a top-down view of our cube, and let's add in one loop cut right here in the middle. Click the left mouse button and then the right mouse button to drop it down in the middle. And now we want to toggle X-ray view, because if I was to try and box select these corners here, I'm only grabbing the top vertices, not the bottom ones, and I want to scale in these sides. So back to top view. To toggle X-ray view, let's push Z and go to toggle X-ray. Box select both corners and scale on the X-axis. And then zoom in to grab this middle vertice that we put in with the loop cut. Push G and lock it on the Y-axis. And look at that, we already got the basic shape of a cake. And then let's bring it up to the floor of our scene. So with G and then push Z to lock it on the Z axis. Drag it up. And here's another helpful tip, is if you want to make small incremental movements, hold shift and it'll be a lot slower when you're moving. And on the numpad also we could push 3 to get a side view. 1 for the other side. 7 is the top down. So let's drag this up on the Z axis. Oh, that's a tall piece of cake. Then I might scale mine down a little bit, so let's hit S and then lock it on the Z axis because it's a little too tall for my liking. And then G, let's go back to our side view to get it back down to the floor. G and on the Z axis. And then it's always important to stay organized, so let's go ahead and name this cake slice. So now that we have our basic shape of our cake slice, let's go ahead and bring in our reference images. It's a great idea to make sure you have good reference images. That way we can make sure our objects and models look as realistic and believable as possible. I liked this image here because of the sprinkles on the edge here. I think this will be a good idea for teaching particle systems. I really liked this image because of the gel layer up here. I think that will be fun to show layer differences, and when we get into texturing, that will be a lot of fun. I also like the design of the piping on the edge here. Here's another sprinkle one and a rainbow one. This could be fun to use in our model. A lot of different colors. Another great piping work, and I like seeing the real fruit in the layers of it. Man, I feel like I'm on British Bake Off right now. It's a soggy bottom. And to bring in reference images, it's a good idea to have its own collection. So in our collection menu here, click this button with the plus sign, new collection, and let's label this one reference or ref. And with that selected, let's go ahead and hit Shift A, image, and reference. And then add in your favorite reference images, and let's have them in the background while we model. And if you add in your images like this, it's going to be placed in how you view, where your camera's viewed at. So to reset the rotation of it, we want to hit Alt R and that resets the rotation. And then let's rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees and rotate it on the z-axis 90 degrees. And let's push it over to the side, that way it's out of our model. Now that we have our reference images in, we could drop the opacity of them by clicking the data here, checking the box opacity. Actually, hold Alt and click it so it applies to all of them. And while holding Alt, let's drag this down to about a 0.25. With our reference images set, we don't want to be able to select them on accident or accidentally move them while we're working on our actual object and model. So let's click these filters here and add in the selectable and our screen and uncheck the whole collection for reference. So now we can't click these reference images at all. They're frozen in the space there. When working in Blender in 3D, it's a lot like other art forms, like drawing or illustration and animation, where you're wanting to start with the simplest forms and the simplest shapes and build upon that to get to your end result. So just like this, you could see how the layers are separated, and we can add that into our geometry and be able to shape out this cake and be able to shade it easily. So as you can see in some of these reference images, there's a thick layer of frosting, and there's even a layer that goes on the back of it here, a layer of frosting that goes through the middle, and we have two cake layers. And it even applies to these two other more visually complex ones where there's more layers or there's a different texture or a different feel to the cake. But it's all the same process. We're trying to break down the layers and add in the geometry for it. So let's get into it. So with our cake selected, what we could start doing is adding in geometry to break down the layers. So let's tab into edit mode. And I think I want to start with the back layer of frosting. So with Command R, let's add in a loop cut. Bring it all the way back here. And then from our top-down view, we can see that the vertices aren't lined up, but we can fix that easily by selecting them and scale it. Let's scale it on the y-axis and hit 0 and enter. So now we have a perfect straight line there for our back frosting layer. And now let's add in the top layer of frosting and the middle layer of frosting. Let's add in one loop cut for the top here. And let's add in another one. And we can always move our vertices, so let's hit G, and on the Z-axis, let's move it down a little bit to get a little even layers. We want Paul Hollywood to be proud of us. So here we got the geometry for a 2-layer cake slice. Let's go ahead and add in one more loop cut right here in the middle. And then back in object mode, we can go ahead and add in a subdivision modifier. And you can go to the modifier menu and generate subdivision surface. And you can do it this way. Or you can use the shortcut Control 2 to add in 2 layers of subdivision. And then let's go back into edit mode and add in a loop cut at the bottom. And we can right click and shade smooth. With our modifiers on there now, it would be a good idea to plan out our shaders and assign those now before we get ahead of ourselves. So back into edit mode, we can toggle X-ray and go to our side view. Let's select all the cake faces, go down into materials, add a new one, and let's name this cake, and we can assign that texture there, and let's just go ahead and invert our selection and create another one, and let's create another material and name it frosting and assign it to those faces. So now it'll be easier to only select frosting or only select the cake. Now let's prepare some of the detail work like the piping on the edge here. I think it'd be nice to have a little bit of a piping edge and then add in some sprinkles on top of that. So to get the basic form of a piping on the edge here, so Shift A, Mesh, and we can add in a cube and immediately add a level of subdivision. Let's bring it up above the cake so we can see it. Scale it down. Oh, and before we get ahead too, let's go ahead and apply the scale and everything to our cake slice. So Command A and apply all transformations. So for this icing, let's go ahead and move it where we need it. And let's size it up to how we need the shape. So with our cube now placed here, we can either enlarge it to stretch across by scaling on the x-axis across like that, or we can use Shift D to duplicate and pin it on the x-axis again. And then let's do it one more time. So now we got the basic shapes of a frosting edge here. And let's go ahead and shade smooth to all of them. And later we will combine these meshes in the sculpting phase of this and get into some more details with it. So here we can place it a little more asymmetrical and more believable. There we go. I think our cake slice is looking pretty good. I'm going to call it frosting blob and dot 001. And let's copy that name and change it to 2 and 3. And now we can get into the sculpting phase of this cake slice. First, before I ever sculpt, I like to make copies of my objects. So let's go ahead and make a backup collection. And with everything selected, let's hit Shift D, right click, and hit M to move. And let's move all those to our backup collection. And we can go ahead and turn that one off. That way it's not visible in our scene. So now let's select our frosting blobs, and we can apply these modifiers. And with all of our frosting blobs selected, let's go ahead and Control J to join them all together to make one object. And we can go into, before that, let's go ahead and reset the origin to the geometry and go into sculpt mode. And if we hit R, we can remesh this. And for this, we could probably do a 0.07. That might depend on your graphics card and the computer you're working on. So let's go up to remesh now and remesh, or we can use Control R. So now you can see that it took away some of our smoothing, but that's easy to fix with the smoothing brush, which is S. And up here you can see the radius and strength of our brush. And we can go ahead and just smooth that out a little bit. And now we can start adjusting this mesh to fit the cake slice a little better with G and the grab tool. And for this, we probably want to raise the radius of our brush, and we press F to adjust radius, or you can hit Shift F to adjust the strength. Now I think our frosting blobs are looking pretty good. Now let's take this into the cake slice. Let's take a look at our geometry here. When you're combining geometry to other geometry, it's important to make sure there's similar amount of faces going on. So all we'll need to do is go into sculpt mode and remesh this one as well. We could probably go ahead to a 0.7 as well just to match. And then here now you can see that where it was important for us to make sure that we marked our materials and frosting when it was the simple shapes, because this would be kind of a nightmare to be selecting these shapes and faces when we get to the shading. So now let's join the frosting blobs to the cake. With that join, let's go into sculpt mode and maybe let's add in a little more geometry. Let's do a 0.06. And I'm going to drop the strength of my smooth brush down. And when you're sculpting, having a graphics tablet does come in handy, but it's also not needed. I'm just using a mouse here to smooth out everything, and I'll be using a mouse through the whole tutorial to show you that some tools are needed, some tools are nice to have, but regardless of what you have, you can make do with what you have, and you don't need fancy tablets or fancy computers just to make something pretty cool in 3D. Really, you can make do with what you have to learn Blender and learn 3D. It's all a matter of just how much you want it and how much of a passion or how much of a love you have for 3D and for this art form. I'm going to raise my brush strength a little bit more. I'm thinking our cake slice is looking really delicious right now. Now let's sculpt in some details to the frosting. Now in sculpt mode, we can go over to our draw tool, or we can hit the shortcut V. And the draw tool is going to allow us to add on to our mesh, or you can invert it and dig into the mesh. You can also invert the draw tool by holding Control and using the tool. Now I want to go for a more homemade cake look and a more organic feel, not so professional. I want it to look like one of the cake slices I got as a kid on my birthday, because my mom used to make all of my birthday cakes for me. And I can't say it enough that really just experimenting and playing with settings is really going to help you learn what these tools do and how you can accomplish your end result. With the frosting details all sculpted in now, let's get into the cake texture. Now we can spend hours and hours in trying to sculpt in all these holes and crevices of a cake texture, or we can hop into Photoshop where I can show you how to make a sculpting brush pretty easy. So with your image in Photoshop, add the adjustment black and white, and let's add in a contrast adjustment too and boost that up. With that done, let's export a copy, that way we can bring it into Blender. Now back in Blender in sculpt mode, let's go to our draw brush and let's duplicate the brush, that way we don't lose our original brush. Let's rename this to cake texture. And in our new brush, let's make sure front faces only is checked off. And let's add in a new texture and go to the texture menu and open up that image that we just edited. And now with our image loaded in, let's switch our mapping from view plane to area plane. And in our stroke, let's switch it from space to anchored. Congratulations, you just made a custom sculpting brush. Let's test it out and give it a spin. Now we're getting really close to a realistic looking cake, and I'm loving how these sculpting details add so much to the model. Now I want to smooth out the section of frosting in the middle, and we can go open up this menu and turn on wireframe in our viewport. That way we can see where that frosting section is. Now that we see our sections, we just need to hop back into sculpt mode and smooth out the sections that will be frosting. Time for shading and color. Now when you click shading at the top of Blender, it's going to switch your workspace up to something like this. And what you'll see are shader nodes. This is a basic shader, and we're just going to edit it a little bit to get the right color and right roughness and shine to it. So for the cake, I'm going to make it a vanilla cake, so let's make it a little of an off-white in the yellow direction. And let's bring up the roughness a little bit. Time for frosting. Now the only difference with the frosting shader is that we're going to drop the roughness down to make it look shiny or like a wet frosting. We got cake! Let's add in some sprinkles and go over particle systems now. First, what we'll want to do is create a vertex group for the sprinkles on the cake. Once your vertex group is made, jump into weight paint mode. Weight paint mode is similar to a texture paint mode, but here we are only able to assign weights to vertices and faces. And with the normal brush selected, we could go into the tool menu here, and I'm going to show you we can go down and adjust the jitter, and this will be spacing out the dots of the weight paint. So as you can see here, it's spreading it out a little more organically, as if someone dropped the sprinkles down. Jitter helps create a more organic feel and not such a perfect straight line. I use weight paint a lot when I'm doing environment design. With the weight set now, we can get into making our sprinkle collection. So create a new collection and name it sprinkles. Shift A and add a cube, and this is going to be our first sprinkle. Let's move it to the side here so we could get a good view on it. And first things first, I'm going to add 2 levels of subdivision and scale it out on the x-axis. In edit mode, let's add in a few loop cuts to get more of a shape of a sprinkle. Damn, that's a huge sprinkle. Let's scale it down and adjust the shape a little bit. Now I'm going to make a few copies of the sprinkle. That way we can have different variations and different looks. That way our cake looks a little more realistic. In edit mode, what we can also use is called proportional editing, and the shortcut for that is O. And you can scroll up and down on your mouse wheel to make the circle bigger. And this allows you to move more vertices, more edges, faces in a proportional way, and it makes getting curves to your model way easier. Let's just give some of these sprinkles a little different variations. Time to color these sprinkles. So just like before, I'm going to use something similar to the frosting shader and get it to be a little shiny. After that, we have our first shader done, and we just duplicate and change the color for the rest. With the sprinkles ready, let's get into particle systems. So in particle systems, we're going to create a new one and switch it to a hair system and rename it to sprinkles. You'll also need to rename the actual particle system too. I don't know why the particle system settings and the name don't just match up. Something maybe Blender should fix in the next update. I'm going to drop down the number count and let's adjust the hair length too. Let's also switch the distribution from jitter to random. And I don't want an even distribution. I want it to be more organic. Let's check off this rotation box. That way we can orient the sprinkles the way we want to. In render, let's render as a collection and pick sprinkles. Let's check off object rotation and pick random. Then scroll down to vertex groups and let's set the density to our sprinkles vertex group. At first you might not see them, but that's just because particle systems do funky things to the scale of objects. So let's just adjust the scale a little bit. Then let's set the object's orientation to object Y. And then you can adjust the phase and the rotation randomness. That way everything's not in a straight line and pointing in the same direction. Now just experiment with some of these particle settings and play around until you have something that you like. Shee, my tummy grumbling now. With the cake done now, let's make a plate. Let's add in a circle. And before you click anything, let's open up this object menu down here. And in Blender, you can actually input math operations. So let's do a ×2 to this. That way we have double vertices. Let's scale it up and then let's hop into edit mode. Using A, let's make sure all vertices are selected, and then let's press F to fill. With that face now selected, we could press I to inset to create another face within the circle, and let's add a loop cut here. And with proportional editing, let's make the dish of the plate basically. With the loop cut selected that we put in, let's do Control B to bevel and add in a couple more loop cuts here to round it off. With the basic geometry made, now let's add in a solidify modifier. Adjust the thickness to make it look more like a plate. And then let's just make sure that the cake is actually on the plate. Ah, fork! I forgot we need a fork. We want to be able to eat our cake, so let's bring in a reference image and let's start with a plane. And what I'm going to do is just again make the basic shape of this fork, and then let's extrude out some edges till we have our fork shape. I go back and forth between proportional editing and individual vertex editing. You'll find yourself going back and forth between tools and methods till you get your desired outcome. A lot of 3D design is problem solving. With the fork geometry done now, let's add a solidify modifier to that as well, and a subdivision. Now using proportional editing, I'm going to get the curve of a fork, which actually proved to be a little more difficult than I thought. But using proportional editing and rotate, we ended up with a fork. With the plate and fork done now, I'm going to apply the solidify modifiers and subdivision modifiers, and let's start texturing. First though, I'm going to add in another loop cut to this plate so the edges will be rounded off like a realistic plate. So for that, I just scale out that loop cut and then let's bevel it. Now let's make our fork look like it's metal instead of some clay. Metal shaders are fairly simple. All you need to do is add in a new material. And all we're going to do is drop the roughness down and bring up the metallic. And there you have it. You have a metal fork now. But who am I kidding? My kitchen forks aren't like King Charles. They ain't shining in the light like that. So I brought up the roughness a little bit. For the plate shader, we're going to have a shiny ceramic look. So bring the roughness down again. And for this first variation of the cake, I'm going to keep it white. But let's add in some accent color. With face select enabled, let's go ahead and hold Alt and select this row and this row. Create a new shader slot, and let's just duplicate the plate shader. And let's just change the color to something more of a navy blue. Everything's really coming together now, and I think it's almost ready for the judging table. All that's left is to put the fork in the cake. Let's just scale it down to something a little more proportional and put it right in the cake. Let there be cake! Well, congratulations, you just made your first cake slice in Blender. Now I think I want to make a few different variations and flavors, that way Zumbo and Duff aren't mad at me. I'm going to speed up this process a little bit, but I'm going to do a chocolate and then a rainbow cake because my son really wanted that too. Here for the rainbow frosting, I just add in a gradient texture and a color ramp. That way I can create a gradient of colors. That way the frosting looks more rainbow. And then to map a texture, all you need to do is have your texture selected and hit Control T, and that gives you a map to control where this gradient is on the cake. I don't know about you, but looking at all this cake has sure made me hungry. I think we're going to be winning a blue ribbon for sure. Now that's a piece of cake. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. And thanks for watching.